Hello, I'm Robert Greenwald, Director of Racially Charged and President of Brave New Films, a nonprofit social justice media company. Our work is to create films and to tell the stories that aren't being told, to connect the dots, to expose the darkness. Misdemeanors are a major part of the carceration system, with between 12 and 13 million people oppressed and suppressed by the use of misdemeanors, and primarily people of color. Now, the short documentary that you're about to see tells the stories of the present and the past, the inequities that connect and exist today that started right after the Civil War and continue and continue and continue. Profiteering and punishment are a toxic combination, and they're built on racism. I want to thank our partners for tonight's screening, the League of Women Voters of California and Elizabeth Leslie, the ACLU of Northern California, Initiate Justice, and many of you who are watching in many different formats in many different places. As you'll see in the film, and then you'll hear from our speakers, it's all too easy to do the same thing the same way, even when it fails to keep us safe, even when we spend obscene amounts of money, and even when it's inherently racist. And all of us know, many of us know, how really hard it is for data and for science to combat emotion. Now, the film is one piece of an effort to combine emotion and data in the fight for justice, to put a face on policy, as we often talk about in our work at Brave New Films. The film, because we're a nonprofit and because of our wonderful funders, is available for free, and it's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, everything from 1 minute to the full 32 minutes. And it's available for everyone to screen in their homes, in their schools, in their workplaces, when it's safe, there's Zoom. So the film will start momentarily, but just a reminder, once the film is done, that's when the work really begins. And join us right after the film, as you'll hear from people who are on the front lines, who are doing the work to make us safer and to change the oppressive policies of misdemeanors. Thank you. And now, Renato, let's start the film, please.
Biggest misconception about misdemeanors is that they are minor.
To start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, that broke my heart.
They're the ones that are using the system.
My grandma was fighting for integration back in her day, and I'm fighting for the same thing now.
The problem is the system is working the way it's supposed to.
We're recording.
Sorry.
Sometimes I feel like my life ended that day.
My car died on the side of the road. A cop walked over to my car and asked me if I needed help, and I said no.
John Clark was convicted on a misdemeanor gambling charge and was forced to work on a chain gang.
I just remember being pushed, like being cornered into a wall.
I was just starting out life.
And I didn't think I had anything to hide.
Mary Gay was sentenced to 30 days, plus court costs for stealing a hat.
I was arrested that evening.
It was a misdemeanor. That was the beginning of the nightmare that I had to go through.
Henry Nelson was arrested for using abusive language in the presence of a female and was sent off to the coal mines.
He said, "You're going to jail." And I'm like, "What for?"
Misdemeanors have historically been the chump change crimes that we didn't pay attention to.
I've done nothing.
Man, I just got beat up by the police last night. I could have lost my life.
13 million. That's about 80% of all American criminal dockets. 80% of what our criminal courts do is misdemeanors.
Got him in cuffs, look. I ain't doing nothing.
The story of misdemeanors is the story of law enforcement continuing to prioritize African Americans, Mexican immigrants, America's so-called criminal class.
You act like I really just committed a serious crime.
You did do something illegal. You crossed the crosswalk.
You might see 2 or 3 police standing here waiting for you.
Cops will jump out of the van anytime, anywhere.
That's what I was doing.
The misdemeanor system has not gotten its fair share of blame. Misdemeanors are the invidious first step in the racialization of crime in this country.
Too often, arrests for minor crimes devolve into police violence and death for Black and brown people.
They got me for jaywalking.
Not wearing a seatbelt.
My tail light was out.
I was arrested for being home. Driving with a suspended license. My license got suspended because I didn't know I had unsafe parking.
I was shocked when I was arrested. They claimed that I was in
I want $744 fine because I couldn't pay back.
How far back that goes is a really dark story. Reconstruction was an era when 4 million African Americans made it out of bondage and were able to achieve at really high levels, whether it was in business, in education, different ways of prosperity that really threatened white supremacy.
They elected many Black men to positions of power. Of course, that was a sea change from how power had been exercised during slavery, and a lot of white folks just didn't like it. They were nostalgic for the old days of overt white supremacy, and so they subverted Reconstruction.
If you look at misdemeanors and you track them from the Reconstruction era to modern day, you see the fingerprints everywhere of white supremacy and control of Black bodies.
The landowners, they had nearly lost everything. And the only way to get that back is to somehow corral the Black labor force back onto the same plantations that they had once worked.
The most effective way of forcing African Americans back into this condition that would be so similar to slavery was to begin to criminalize Black life itself.
Misdemeanor offenses for incredibly trivial or made-up things, what should have been tiny penalties for non-existent offenses, turn into years of people's lives.
Where were you taken? I was taken out to the camps. Where did you sleep? Slept on some hay. Chain was on me.
I'm being put into handcuffs. I'm being dragged into this cold space. I don't have anything to cover myself. And I'm asked to sit inside of this tiny little room, and I have no idea why I'm there.
Was there any jury that tried you? No, sir. Did the recorder ask you whether you wanted a lawyer? No, sir.
And I thought that I would have time to talk to a court-appointed attorney so we could talk about what happened. I could ask them to get other, pieces of evidence that would prove that, hey, I'm poor. It wasn't like I was trying to run off with this money.
Did they furnish any copy of the charge against you? No, sir, they did not. Did they give you any opportunity to plead to any accusation? They never gave me anything at all.
When they asked me how I pled no contest. I didn't understand that no contest is the same as guilty, and that I would walk away with a misdemeanor that would affect my ability to get hired.
The justice system
after emancipation was weaponized against Black people. It perpetuated slavery by making the mechanisms of enslavement pretty much the same. Family separation, backbreaking labor, people having no rights. You could be sold on the steps of the courthouse that you were convicted in and given to the highest bidder.
A whole separate criminal code that applied to African Americans was established.
Many misdemeanor offenses are best understood as mechanisms of social control. They're not designed to catch dangerous or guilty people, but rather they are tools. We give them to police as additional ways of exercising their authority.
Some of these laws were overtly race-based, and with others then and now, the understanding was that the laws would look race-neutral, but they would be applied and enforced almost exclusively against Black people.
For these governments to sell prisoners into slavery, you first have to arrest lots of people. There's a big problem with that, though. There's just not enough crime for this system to work and for it to be profitable. The state governments of the South had to invent new crimes.
Southern legislatures, which are essentially run by Confederates at that time, are trying to reinscribe a form of slavery through a system of laws called Black Codes.
A whole category of new statutes passed in almost every southern state that attached these enormous penalties to what were in reality very minor thefts. Those were laws, and many others like it, that were only ever enforced against African Americans. And so it became a way to have a basis for arresting huge numbers of Black people.
I don't remember much about writing the check.
John Owen was caught taking 6 ears of corn from a cornfield and was arrested under the Black Codes.
This is $4, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times 4 is $28. So just this pile right here is how much I went to jail for.
Owen was put in jail for months until he was finally tried for theft.
I have a theft charge. It's theft by check. I had money in the bank, but I didn't know how long it took for checks to process. Like, I know better now. I could have donated plasma, gotten $25.
Under his sentence, Owen was leased into convict labor and sent to the chain gang, where he served 2 years for the corn and a 3rd year for the court costs.
I was in the Hayes County Jail for a total of 45 days for $25 worth of food.
Michael Brown, who was the teenager who was killed by police in Ferguson, whose death led to the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, he was stopped for jaywalking. He stepped off the sidewalk and was walking in the street, and there was a local criminal ordinance that made it a crime to do so. African Americans are being cited for jaywalking at 3, 5, 10 times the rate of white pedestrians.
The legislatures of the white South make it a crime to walk alongside a railroad. In an era in which there are no paved roads, the easiest way for a poor person to get from one place to another is to walk alongside a railroad. That law didn't say this only applies to Black people, but those were laws that were only ever enforced against African Americans.
All of us engage in what would be considered to be minor crimes. And for some people, it's crossing the street at the wrong time. But if you're Black or brown, then it becomes categorized as something that's criminal.
So what is I doing?
Didn't use a crosswalk.
All I'm trying to do is go home, man. I'm tired. I just got off of work.
Nandi Kane says he was walking home from work when it happened.
Because I felt like they were gonna draw a gun out and shoot me in my back.
I'm tired of all this shit, man.
Vagrancy laws were passed that essentially meant any Black person who was found on the streets unemployed and couldn't show evidence of work was a criminal. a vagrant.
Trespass laws originate from this idea that African Americans only belong in certain spaces and at certain times. And so they give police officers the ability, under the guise of law, to dictate where an African American person can be, what time they can be there, and how they can operate in certain spaces.
My kids' daycare was inside of one of the buildings to the Skyway, so I figured I'd take a walk, find somewhere to sit down, and wait on them to get there.
I'm going to New Horizons to pick up my kids. I was sitting there for 10 minutes.
Monroe Dolphus was standing in the train yard when he was grabbed by the sheriff's deputy. Monroe stated that he had not committed any crime.
Wait. You're gonna go to jail. I'm not doing anything wrong. Hold on. Can you please? No, come on, brother. I'm not your brother. This is assault.
At this moment, I saw my children's daycare class and their teachers and everything walking past while this was happening. He took the taser and drove it into my leg, and pretty much at that point, lost all control of the leg.
The deputy later claimed that the crime committed by Dolphus was taking a 25-cent tin of fish from the lunch pail of a Southern Railway worker. Unable to provide any evidence to support this, the charge was changed to vagrancy.
And I kept asking them what I was being charged with. They'll create false charges just to make sure that everything is perpetuated.
Judge Longshore found Dolphus guilty of misdemeanor vagrancy and sentenced him to 5 months and 20 days of hard labor in the mines of Tennessee, coal, iron, and railroad.
Going back to the vagrancy laws of the late 19th century, the people who make those laws have in mind another group of people for whom there is an inherent threat to their livelihood, like breaking barbecue ordinances in public parks or sleeping in dormitories that white people don't think you live there.
I have every right to call the police.
It allows law enforcement to regulate whether or not certain behavior for one group of people is deemed criminal and another group of people is just frivolous activity.
Many people remember the Starbucks debacle in Philadelphia. There were 2 African-American men at a Starbucks. The employee had them arrested for loitering where they're clearly not engaging in that behavior.
What did they get called for? Because there were 2 black guys sitting here meeting me? Yes, I didn't know that.
Loitering is a police tool of choice. It's the go-to offense that police often use to impose their authority. In the misdemeanor system, there is no conduct too minor, no act too small that the state cannot render a crime.
Black people charged with a misdemeanor are 75% more likely to be locked up than white people. You have to realize that these laws didn't happen by chance. They were part of a system to continue to oppress Black bodies.
Our misdemeanor system includes all kinds of offenses, and some of them can be quite serious. Domestic violence, DUI, but most of the time, we treat minor, harmless conduct as misdemeanors. Traffic offenses, jaywalking, order maintenance offenses, spitting, driving on a suspended license for failure to pay a fine. And yet, these minor, meaningless misdemeanors can have terrible consequences for individuals. To understand the misdemeanor system, follow the money.
The accused are paying for the judges, the prosecutors, and the public
More
defenders.
than $3.5 million off phone commissary at the jail. It's a no money maker.
They call it the $20 ad.
Time a family member transfers money in JPay.
Pocketing leftover money from the inmates'
about
food budgets.
$2,000 a month in e-cig
They are a
sales.
controversial food vendor with a
Rampant
big
fraud,
state contract.
waste, and abuse. The company that uses inmate workers.
Today's system is estimated at $80 billion. The misdemeanor side of it is a way of saddling people with fines and fees that will put money in the pockets of the administrators of that system.
The first time I got a ticket, my insurance had lapsed. So I got the speeding ticket and I got a no insurance ticket at the same time. The next time I got pulled over, I was arrested for driving with a suspended license. I paid the tickets, paid the court costs, paid my fees and fines, but they said for driving with a suspended license, the punishment for that is we're gonna suspend your license for 2 years. I would often have to choose between paying my inspection or my registration or paying my light bill or other bills that I had. I had to drive my car to get to work because I had a construction job. If I needed to take material to the job, I couldn't take plywood or 2x4s on a bus.
I felt like there was no way I was gonna be able to take care of the kids on my own while you were out, because I didn't know how long you were gonna be in jail.
This officer saw me, a young Hispanic guy, driving a 63 Impala, and said, you know what, that guy, he's up to something. I was trying to go to work, trying to pay bills, and he's treating me like a hardened criminal. That misdemeanor charge ended up becoming something that I couldn't get rid of.
They are being treated as revenue sources, charged daily fees for being in jail, supervision fees, tether fees, drug testing fees, database fees to fund bail bondsmen, private probation companies, electronic monitoring companies, drug testing companies. It is disturbingly similar to the way that we saw African Americans being exploited in the post-war South.
I'm DeMario Davis, linebacker for the New Orleans Saints. I was born and raised in Mississippi, pretty much raised by a single mom. Entering into my second year of college, me and a teammate were caught shoplifting groceries from Walmart. It kind of felt a lot more like a drug bust than us having stole some groceries. The bail was set at $10,000, and I didn't have $10,000. The football coaches bailed us out. A misdemeanor, you're supposed to be able to be in front of the judge within 90 days, but this is not happening. This is not happening in our country. We have people who are spending 7, 8 months in jail who have not even been sentenced.
Cop arrested me and I was charged with the misdemeanor.
The term chain gang was coined on account of the shackle worn by convict laborers.
They said, okay, listen, we're gonna let you go home now. But Scram's gonna come and put a monitor on you.
They were taken to an anvil where a rivet was pounded into the ankle cuffs to keep them closed. Then the cuffs were chained together.
The initial fee to get on the Scram was $250. That's just to have it put on. Then after that, they charged me $220 a month for the actual monitor.
Many of the convicts suffered from shackle sores, ulcers where the iron ground against their skin. Gangrene and other infections were also common.
Right after they put it on me, you start causing these really severe sores and rashes. And their attitude pretty much is, it's court ordered, it's by a judge, and you'll wear it, or you can go back to jail.
The emaciated convict laborers worked their entire days barefoot, but the shackles were always on their ankles. They mined in them, slept in them, and those who died of disease or beatings were buried in them.
What they're doing is unjust. What they're doing is profiteering, because you're paying them. You're their slave with their shackle on your foot.
I remember this hopeless feeling just overcome me. I couldn't take care of my family.
The biggest misconception about misdemeanors is that they are minor. The full consequences of getting a misdemeanor can be astronomical.
It hurt me for 10 years, and it completely disrupted my life. And I've been trying to figure out how to get my life back on track. This will be a part of my story for the rest of my life.
When people are booked into jails for a week, or a year or even a day, you just cannot avoid the trauma that's inflicted upon you. The moment you hit the jail, you don't come out of that unchanged or untouched. You witness trauma, you witness violence, and it changes you. It changes your community.
I tried to get a job at Amazon where my roommate worked. I called to Walmart and I called to several other retail stores. I got turned away because I had a misdemeanor charge for theft.
Not enough people talk about what it means to have a misdemeanor on your record. It can determine the kind of job that you get, to the kind of housing that you can qualify for, to the kind of schools that you can go to. A lot of people are harmed for life because of the smallest infractions.
They're being rendered homeless. They're going without food, without medication. Their children are suffering.
Due to misdemeanors, I lost my housing. Shortly after that, I lost my vehicle, which led to me losing my job. And it was just one thing after another, like kicks to the face. I had full custody of my children. They had to get to school. We had to sleep in the car, waking up at like 4 in the morning, getting to a laundromat to make sure that they have clean school uniforms.
I had worked so hard and all of that was ruined by one charge. One misdemeanor ruined my ability to get even just basic work.
They can't get a job if they have to check a box that says they've been convicted of a crime. They can't even rent housing because they got poor credit when they received a ridiculous $500 speeding violation. So this system was designed both to extract from people, but also to marginalize their presence in society.
It's finna be a mass grave site.
This is a dormitory. We stupid crowded. These are the beds. They right beside each other. And this is the space.
Everybody just dying and getting sick and shit. Like, this shit serious as fuck. Bro, you alright? You want me to go get the police?
No.
What have you done this bitch?
You ain't gonna do nothing about it.
This motherfucker literally in this bitch dying, bro. I don't know what to do.
One of the worst places to be during this pandemic is locked up in jail.
The judge never said, I'm sending you to prison to die.
The same horror story is emerging of the unchecked spread of infection and inmates essentially being left to die.
Now, jaywalking or theft of a small amount or any sort of vagrancy type of behavior can lead to your incarceration and eventual contracting of the virus and death.
I've been in jail for 2.5 months for petty theft, a nonviolent crime that carries a misdemeanor charge for the price value of less than $100. There's been 3 deaths, 2 being inmates, 1 being a guard. As far as like people who are working for the facility, they're like intertwined. They could easily be catching it. How one of the guards caught it. My life is in danger.
These human beings aren't valued enough for us to apply the same kinds of safety measures there that we are in other sectors of society. If it wasn't already bad enough that you are booked into jail because you didn't have the money to pay the ticket and your license is suspended, that is now life-threatening to you.
Sheriff's Office is now releasing non-violent inmates as a next step in mitigating the spread of COVID-19.
Hundreds of inmates have been released from Shelby County's jail in an effort to put fewer people at risk for coronavirus.
600 inmates.
A total of 38 inmates are ordered to go.
They were inmates. Now they're freed people. Because of COVID-19, thousands of misdemeanor defendants are rightly being released. It's clear that these individuals should have never been incarcerated in the first place. We can tell by the fact that after these releases, we haven't seen any sort of crime wave. There's a different type of crime wave that should concern us, though, and that's the crime of violence against Black people post-Civil War.
State violence has historically been used to intimidate people of color, especially Black people. We see this all throughout history.
Misdemeanors, they have almost nothing to do with public safety. What misdemeanors do is give police an extraordinary amount of discretion with any minor offense premised on the idea that the Black man is a threat.
Misdemeanors are a very specific mechanism that legalize violence toward Black people and keep them in a very particular place, not just as individuals, but as an entire community of people.
When we look at so many cases in history, often what started as an investigation or a claim of a petty misdemeanor offense led to police officer-supported and sanctioned racial terrorism.
All too often, we see police exercising that terrible authority of violence against people who have only been suspected of the most minor of crime.
The problem isn't bad apple cops. The problem is the system is working the way it's supposed to.
Police shot this boy outside my apartment. They killed him.
Don't move! Don't move! Hey, bro! You move, I swear to God! Hey, boss! I'm just different. That's all. I'm so sorry. I have no gun.
Gray appeared to be unable to walk and was screaming as he was carried, feet dragging on the ground, to a police van.
I know, you just on your job.
Mama, they gonna kill me, man, out here. I can't breathe. Please, you need my nigga. I can't breathe, officer. Please.
My life could have so easily been taken in that skyway. George Floyd goes to show further that the most minor of offenses, even no offense at all, could result in death.
The very purpose of racial terrorism is control, is social control.
What we have seen in the killings of those accused was that misdemeanors became the gateway for police violence and murder.
We are seeing decriminalization. We are seeing citations instead of arrests. We are seeing people let out of jail. We are seeing pushback against fines and fees. But at the same time, there is so much more work that needs to be done.
Who defined what a misdemeanor is The whole thing was built on exploitation, on racial violence, on building up industrial capitalism.
We should not be locking up people who speed, who are too poor to pay a fine or a fee, who loiter or trespass or jaywalk. They're not dangerous, they're not scary.
There's never been a good reason to lock up anybody for petty offenses. Like slavery back in the day, the law itself is doing the work of oppression. The criminal law is providing the authority to arrest Black people, to punish Black people, to kill Black people. And ultimately, the real crime is that we're Black.
When officers use their discretion and still choose to arrest low-level offenders instead of citing and releasing them, they are choosing to lock a human into a cage we wouldn't even put our dogs in.
We got 123 people out of the Hayes County Jail yesterday.
It eliminated the penalty for being caught driving with a suspended license from another 2-year suspension to a 90-day suspension.
Don't allow the outside world to corrupt you. Don't allow the outside world to tell you who you are.
I wanted to be a voice for those who are not able to be a voice for themselves.
Thank you, everyone, for joining this screening. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the first of our experts. Lisa James is a formerly incarcerated woman. She was accused of misdemeanor child endangerment for feeding her children in a supermarket. She is a mother, an author, and an advocate for change. After overcoming 20 years of battling with substance abuse, she has dedicated and devoted herself and her life to bringing hope, healing, restoration, and inspiration to women all over the world. Thank you for joining us, Lisa, and hopefully Zoom will work and you can speak now.
Thank you for having me. It's a little, it's not easy to talk about what's really happening. our system and my life. After watching that video and being in the work and living after the convictions and after a time when I didn't know which way my life would go, and then having to come into this space and learning that my convictions were more than what I thought they were. And the punishments that I had received at one time, I thought that I pretty much was given what I was supposed to get based on me being in the state that I was in at the time. And that is what led me to going in and out of jail, getting misdemeanors and they told me at the time, I love what was said in the film, that misdemeanors aren't minor. I heard that a lot, like that, oh, it's just a minor offense. You can get it expunged, it'll go away. And I found myself in desperation feeding my kids in a supermarket. At the time, I remember thinking, I don't know what they'll do. I don't know what'll happen, but my kids are hungry. And I just started feeding them stuff in the store. We were walking around the store. And as we began to walk up to the front of the store, I was approached by who was an undercover officer in the store. And he arrested me. He took me to this room. He took my kids. And he called my mom to come and get my kids. And I ended up going to jail for that. And because I had a prior to that, which was a petty theft, eventually they made it a burglary. I remember going back to try to expunge it because I began to start doing the work, getting with organizations and linking up with people who were fighting, because I didn't really understand. There was a lot going on. There was Prop 21. There were just different political groups explaining to me what the criminal justice system was doing to our people and how the system was designed to keep us in this box. And it was at the time when the Ban the Box campaign had begun. And that's when I started learning more about how that box was impacting my life. I remember coming home and from jail, from prison, thinking that I would be able to start my life over. Like, this is the beginning. I know it's going to be better. I didn't realize, I was so naive. I didn't realize that society has set up a system that was dead set against me, making it from one level to the next in my life, and was going to do everything that it could to make that happen. I began to start realizing the truth about how the system was designed to keep me from moving forward, to keep me from getting my children, to keep me from getting a job, to keep me from doing anything productive. And I was already in a state where I didn't even really know how to start over again. But when I realized that I couldn't even begin there, like start at a job or start with some place to stay, when I realized that that was affected by my misdemeanors, then the thought of having the felony scared me absolutely to death. The system had convinced me that if I got it expunged, it would go away. And I literally thought that that was the case, because we began to start working on doing expungement workshops. And I remember people coming back saying, they said it was expunged, but I tried to get a job here and I tried to get a job there. And because it was there still, they held it against me. I remember when I wanted to draw blood, I wanted to do phlebotomy. And I had the fingerprint for that. And I had already spent all the money going to the class and doing my externship. And when they finally, when all that had to happen first. I had to put the money to it, to work to it. And there was so much hope. I knew I had to do something. I just never stopped doing or trying. But it seemed like everywhere I went, my criminal history followed me. And it stopped me. It snatched something out of me every time it happened to me. So much that I would dress myself up and try to look my best and practice and go to these workshops to learn how to, speak well at an interview and things like that. But inside of me, I still knew. I didn't just want an ordinary job. I wanted something amazing to happen in my life. I'm talking year after year and try after try. My grandchildren went into the system. My children had come out of the system, and my children are grown, and a couple of my grandkids had, my sons have been impacted by foster care. It was the last thing that I wanted to see happen, because as an organizer, I knew already what the system was already designed to do. I know that it's designed to separate, to keep us apart. And I listened to the words in the courtroom when I went to go and see about my grandson, and I heard the judge say, tell him, stay away from her and you stay away from him. And my son was talking to me. It broke his heart because he's a good dad. And he said, why are they trying to keep us separated? I had to explain to him how the system is designed to do that, and how big these systems are, and how much money is put into them, and how, just like those of us that are going back and forth to prison, are incarcerated, or formerly incarcerated, are charged with these fines and fees, and our lives are just totally dismantled, that the foster care system is a part of that. But my misdemeanors and my felonies, and not to mention the fact that my children have been in the system themselves, is created to just snatch that fight out of me. My grandchildren, and I can't do anything about it, because the system is designed to keep us separated. And if you know anything about that system, there are times when some children are fortunate to be with family members, but with criminal histories, when our children are ushered into that system, it's hard to get them out.
Yes.
And I filed an appeal, and it just they didn't even look at it, because they had already knew that I had this history.
Well, that's certainly one of the things that we talk about and found, and appreciate your sharing the pain and the experience. And maybe after the screening, we can talk further and figure out ways that people who are watching tonight can get involved in the specific case and be of assistance and trying to change the whole system. So very, very much appreciate your speaking and coming forth, Lisa, and everything you're doing and continue to do. And I know many of the people watching are cheering you on and sending support, but more importantly, we'll figure out specifics we can do. And with that, I want to introduce our next speaker, Tom Steyer, who left his very successful investing business and has given his money, his time, and his energy fighting for progressive causes. And thank you for that, Tom. He saw ahead of many people the need for registering more young voters and voters of color, and he did something about it. He started Next Gen America, one of the most effective, one of the largest organizations about registering. He started Need to Impeach, ahead again of many people. Tom has led a number of grassroots campaigns, and he's not shy about taking on powerful and special interests. And we're pleased to have you with us, and it's good to see you again, Tom. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Robert. And I do want to echo the appreciation for Lisa James and her connection of the very human impacts of this criminal justice system broadly on society, but more particularly on people in general. And I also want to say how much I respect one of the people I know is going to speak later, Secretary of State Shirley Weber, who's somebody who I've known for a long time and who I know has been a leader in this and so many other areas. That is a great movie. It's a really powerful movie. I think it's really timely in connecting the misdemeanor system to the rest of the criminal justice system, where we've seen so many issues about racism and unequal treatment under the law. It's upsetting. It very much pulls together that long and dreadful history connecting the racism at the heart of our criminal justice system. To me, the point in that movie that just really got me was how much of a mechanism misdemeanors are for the social control of people, and specifically of African Americans. And when you put it in that context, understanding that misdemeanors are by definition small things, that it's things like jaywalking, it's minor pilfering. They can be treated as trivial, and they often are, or they can be treated as criminal, and they sometimes are. And that is at the discretion of the police. Let me say, I'm from New York, I've jaywalked a lot. But police, under the guise of law, have the ability to control people and specifically use it as a means of controlling, punishing, and keeping down African Americans. And you really can't separate it. I mean, this is a year when there's been so much attention about police violence towards African American men. But you really can't separate the way this misdemeanor system has worked from the way that the cash bail system has worked, from the police violence against Black men. That this is a system in and of itself where you can see it personally, and when you listen to Lisa James talk, you can hear the human impact on individual people, and you can see it in the movie. But you can also look at the statistics in terms of imprisonment rates, in terms of prosecution rates by race and how disparate they are. And you can know that these aren't just isolated incidents, but they are in fact part of a systematic racism, acting upon racism. And that even though these are by definition small acts, this movie brings home what I think we probably all knew somewhere, that the ramifications are never small, that the ramifications can be life-altering in the worst way, that they can go far beyond in terms of amount, but also they can go far amount in terms of time. And so when you see this system, when you see this movie, and you pull together what we all know has been happening in America, you know, that's why we really need to have this overt, honest conversation about deep-seated systemic racism and the need to acknowledge and repair it. And so, Robert, I thought the movie was very, very powerful. I thought it is part of this mosaic of understanding that's super important. Very well done, very timely. Thank you, and thank you for including me tonight.
Well, thank you, Tom, and that's so beautifully stated, and thinking of it as a mosaic. I think, I sometimes say it takes a village, but I think it's even better to say it is a mosaic. And, I look forward to working with you and the really so important, the organizations you've started, the structures, the infrastructure. It's not a question of putting on a couple of stupid TV ads that's going to solve the world's problems, but you've walked the walk, not just talked the talk. So we'll be circling back, and thank you for joining us. And
thank you.
With that, I will move towards what I now know is Tom's friend, Dr. Shirley Weber. Dr. Weber is the current Secretary of State of California, talking about, again, personal experience. She was born to sharecroppers in Hope, Arkansas, during the segregation Jim Crow era. Her father left Arkansas after being threatened by a lynch mob, and he did not have the opportunity to vote until he was in his 30s. It was her family's experience in the Jim Crow South that has driven her activism and legislative work. She has fought to secure and she's fought to expand civil rights for all Californians, including restoring voting rights to individuals who've completed their prison term. As Secretary of State, she runs an office of 500 people to ensure government is accountable to everyone. And I know I sleep better at night knowing she is there with her 500 people. So thank you, Dr. Weber. Appreciate your coming, and it's all yours.
Thank you. And I'm honored to be here. And I too, when I listen to people like Lisa, it breaks my heart, number one, but it also reminds me of, just as I've often felt in many ways in California and elsewhere, that there's such a fine line and a thin line between her life and mine. And I can't tell you why, other than maybe my parents or whatever, but, I can't tell you why I'm the person that I am and the opportunities that I had and that she is, because the reality is the system is so designed against us that most of us who have been somewhat successful don't know why. And we know that we've had certain opportunities and what have you, but it's almost like, but for the grace of God, there I go. And I've had friends who have had same experience I had in terms of being raised in the projects, parents who were fairly diligent about working every day and what have you. But, a circumstance happens, a person is in the wrong place at the wrong time and things happen. And, we were fortunate that my father was not killed in Arkansas, that his brothers got him out in the middle of the night and took him to Texarkana and put him on a train to come to my mother's mother in California. And then 3 months later, worked hard to bring my mother and the 6 of us at the time, eventually became 8 of us, to California. But that for the grace of God, because we knew the history and we knew what was happening in the South. And as I look at the chain gangs and other kinds of things like that, he could have been in one of those, because he refused to back down and he refused to allow them to continue to cheat him at the way station, because he was a sharecropper, which is a half step above a slave. And he understood that and was denied so many opportunities, whether it's to go to school, to work in different places, to do things like that. And so there, but for the grace of God, would have been my family, would have been my life, who I am. And so I recognize that this country is designed and organized and prepared against African Americans. As we watch, as I see every day, the difference between one group and another group of African Americans and how we live. Things about misdemeanors is that, and I thank Tom for being my friend always. He's a good guy who does good work and never backs down and is always supportive. And I just thank God for him being in California and he and his wife having always the vision and the mission to help others. You know, when I did AB 953, the racial profiling bill that got through, and the first one in the nation to really mandate that all stops had to be recorded and determined, and so that we could get the data that's there. And it was interesting because part of the premise was not, for me, was not just the collecting of data, but the recognition that most of the horrible things that happen to Black people start with a minor offense, quote unquote, not a major one. We're not talking, I mean, when we look at the list of things that happened, it was not because somebody was robbing a store, kidnapping somebody, having killed someone, whatever. It was always a minor offense, someone stopping you. And for whatever reason, depending on the time of day and the officer who did the stop, bad things could happen to you. Horrible things could happen. You know, I had a nephew the other day in Los Angeles, in the Valley, had gone to lunch with my daughter and his other cousins and was getting in his car. And because he was having a conversation with a woman who wanted to talk to him, and he's a minister, and he stood there having this conversation. Before he knew it, there was 6 cops cars around him that somebody had called on him. And he began to realize that in that moment, he was in tremendous danger for doing nothing. And he manipulated himself in so many ways to de-escalate the situation, because the officers were escalating and constantly asking the woman, are you in danger? Is there something wrong? Is what's happening? And she was like, no, she had actually initiated the conversation. An older woman who was just having a great day out in the sun. And they want to know, why are you in this neighborhood? He was in the Valley of Los Angeles. Why are you here? Well, he lived not far from there. But in that moment, he realized how vulnerable he was, how they saw him as a criminal, despite the car that he was driving, despite his basically demeanor of not looking like a quote unquote gang member, that he, in that very moment, his whole life, he said it scared him so much because he realized, and he said he almost got nervous, but he realized if he got nervous, that would even bring more attention to him. And so what happens is Black life is so fragile that these kinds of things happen daily to our children. And most families or most parents are so concerned because these minor misdemeanors supposedly become major events that can escalate in a matter of seconds and change your life forever. And it's so unbelievable that these things continue to happen. But as pointed out, and I think this film was absolutely wonderful, because I love the fact that you show the 2 stories, the past and the present, because sometimes people don't want to recognize the fact that the brutality that African Americans suffer in this country is really organized and designed by the systems itself that it has designed to perpetuate the dominance of African Americans by whites. That the lynchings that we saw back in the early 1900s and those kinds of things were designed to continue to create fear and submission in the minds of African Americans. And these things continue to this day. And so it's no accident that an officer could sit for 9.5 minutes with his knee in someone's neck and show no remorse. Why? Because these are not people. These are not human beings. And so we have gotten to the point where our hearts have been so seared against the humanity of African Americans that we can witness their deaths and the things that happen and not feel a sense of remorse. And even though we look at the data and we can say, wow, look, Black people are convicted of more crimes than anybody else for the same crime, but at a harsher rate. And judges can look at it and say, yeah, that's true. And that's it. They don't change their behavior. They don't change what they do. Officers can say, wow, yeah, we stop Black people more than anyone else. And generally we stop them with almost no offense. And as a result, we don't convict them of anything when we stop them. And yet when we stop whites, it's for a reason. And we have a higher level of conviction, even though a lower rate of stopping. Why? I mean, and they see this and they say the same thing. Yeah, that's real. That's it. There's no effort to change the system at all, because the humanity of African Americans has been taken away, and the heart that should be there and the feeling should be there is not there. For folks like Lisa, you know, to take their children away, there's no sense of remorse about that. because they've done that for generations and generations and generations. And so when I look at this, I see this movie, and I think there was just another movie that just won an Academy Award, Two Distant Strangers, whatever it was. Same story, getting in the minds of what happens when a young man wakes up in the morning and is confronted, not because he has committed any crime at all, other than being Black. And he's constantly afraid that someone's going to punish him for being Black, that his humanity will be taken away. So we have a lot to do, but I enjoyed this film. I enjoyed it immensely. It breaks my heart to see the pain that Lisa James is feeling, but I've seen it so much in those who've been convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. And then we let them out of jail, and I have bills to give them benefits when they leave. And the attitude is oftentimes, well, they may not have committed that crime, but they probably did something. And so we keep them in jail for stuff they didn't do as like a safety measure at some point, because this guy didn't do this crime, but more than likely he did something. So therefore the system is never sad about locking you up for 15, 20, 30 years for crime you didn't do, because why? They feel like you probably did something that had 50 years attached to it. It's that sense that they're criminals anyway. And so therefore, this is a part of justification for keeping quote unquote the society safe. But thank you for this film. I will definitely share it with all of my friends. And I think it has to, I hope it wakes people up. We've been talking about this for a long time, the 400 years of oppression, the 400 years of dehumanization, the 400 years of searing their hearts against the humanity of African Americans. Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman, asking us a question because she was never treated as one. The signs, I am a man, is still seared on people's chest after 40, 50, 60 years. And we still walk the streets saying Black Lives Matter. It's a long journey. I have to believe that it's a journey that involves more than just me now, that it involves a lot of people who don't look like me, because I think the real answer lies not in how hard can Black people fight, it's whether or not white people want to fight. And that's really the answer, because we have done all we can. We have suffered more, and we have given more sacrifices of people's lives than one should ever have to do in any civilized country. And the real outrage in my mind should be among my white brothers and sisters who are tired of seeing it themselves. And I hope that this film brings that out in them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Weber, for everything you're doing and continue to do. And I hope the film, coming as it is right now, coming with lots of Black and white people working on it, will be able to make a difference. We'll be able to arouse, where film is strong, as it can reach the heart better than a study or a report can. And we hope that we'll reach people's hearts with this, and we'll be looking forward to working with you and your 500 people on your staff to spreading the word as well as we can, using every possible social media platform. So thank you again. And speaking of data, it's now my pleasure to introduce the Chesa Boudin, the District Attorney of San Francisco, who's a fierce, fierce advocate for promoting safety for every single one of us. He uses science, he uses data, he uses facts to prevent crime by addressing the root causes, not by waiting till the crime has been done, but trying to stop it before it happens, which is fundamentally the way each and every one of us becomes safer. And I'm deeply appreciative of his efforts and his concerns and his sleepless nights about safety for all of us. So with that, Chesa.
Thank you so much, Robert. And really, I want to just start by congratulating you, Jill, and everyone at Brave New Films for this premiere. I mean, it's an honor to be here, to watch this important film, and to stand and speak alongside such a distinguished group of folks. It's really an honor to be here with our amazing Secretary of State. I remember Dr. Weber back when she was in Sacramento at the legislature. And I got to meet with her shortly after I took office. And it was an honor. I still have the photo we took that day, along with Tom Steyer, whose reputation precedes him. I've got friends I've known 20 years who've been profoundly influenced by him, worked with him in various capacities. And of course, Lisa James, whose personal story makes clearer than just about anything else ever could the failings, the horrific impacts of our approach to criminal justice. And I also just want to briefly thank the League of Women Voters, the ACLU of Northern California, and Initiate Justice for helping to host this important event. You know, the issues that Lisa shared with us, that Dr. Weber, you know, in her entire life story make crystal clear, are issues that we see in my work every single day. And we can never forget the human impact on people like Lisa, right? And, you know, this film is such a critical part of raising awareness around the impact of misdemeanors in our broader criminal legal system. You know, the overreach of the legal system, and particularly the harmful impacts of that overreach on people of color, is far too often overlooked or underappreciated by folks who haven't lived that experience, right? I remember when I first started reading Alexandra Nadapov's academic work years ago, and she's written masterfully about this problem, about this kind of foundation of our criminal legal system and the way that it siphons people, particularly poor people, people of color, into debt, into incarceration, into a downward spiral where housing and education and healthcare become unobtainable, not just for them, but for their spouses, for their children, for the next generation. And I am so glad that this film has brought that work and that understanding to reach more people in a format that will be impactful and memorable and understandable to a much wider audience than maybe would take the time to read law journal articles. You know, too often when we have these conversations around criminal justice, people focus on serious crimes. And those crimes are important, they're serious. We use that word for good reason. But it distracts often from the reality that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of people who come into contact with the legal system, right, with police, with criminal courts, with judges, with prosecutors, they come into contact for low-level misdemeanor offenses, right? Many of these things that have nothing to do with public safety. You know, Tom Steyer gave the example of crossing the street in New York City against the light. Everybody does that in New York. And yet the law empowers police to stop, to question, to interrogate, potentially to search or arrest, to give citations, to command to come to court, to pay fees and fines, right? For something that everybody does every day. Now, that discretion, that overreach of criminal laws is something that is experienced disproportionately by poor people and people of color. It's something that funnels folks into the criminal legal system in ways that can dramatically impact the course of their lives. And I think Lisa talked so powerfully about this and shared her own experience. That story, Lisa's story, is one, you know, in some manner or another is experienced by millions of Americans every year. And, you know, we cannot overstate the impact of something like a misdemeanor arrest or conviction on someone's long-term prospects of obtaining a job or securing housing or avoiding deportation if they're a non-citizen, right? And even though misdemeanors do not lead to prison, they lead to jail, they lead to fees and fines, they lead to a slew of lifelong, often devastating impacts. And the stigma of the arrest alone or the conviction alone can also impact people long after the case has concluded. And we've seen, you know, Robert talked about empirical evidence. We know from overwhelming amounts of evidence that even short periods of incarceration, a day or 2 days, can lead to someone committing crime in the future that they never otherwise would have done. I think, you know, even more severe, even more profound than incarceration or future criminal behavior is something that I think is very close to home for all of us in this moment that we're living through as a nation. Just days after the verdict against Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. That case was a case that was about Black Lives Matter. It was a case that was about police excessive force. It was a case about police officers brutally murdering an unarmed Black man. But let's not forget why those police officers were there, why they were called, why they showed up, why they put George Floyd in handcuffs to begin with. Police were responding to an allegation of a $20 bill that might have been counterfeit, right? And let's not forget that as we sit here talking to each other today, right, we're still in the aftermath, we're still unraveling and making sense of the killing of Daunte Wright, who was stopped, right, just, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, by police for what? What was he stopped for? For having an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. The broad power of police to stop and even arrest people for these kinds of low-level offenses has devastating consequences. Sometimes jail, turning someone's life upside down, causing them to lose housing or custody of their children, often in ways that will never make the news, the way that Daunte Wright and George Floyd's devastating outcomes made the news, but often in smaller ways, more pernicious, more subtle ways that continue a system of oppression that this country's poorest and African Americans have known since the founding of the country. Enforcement, arbitrary, discriminatory enforcement and arrests of misdemeanor offenses has given the police all across this country broad, almost unchecked discretion. And we know that it is not discretion that is exercised or enacted or enforced equitably, right? It's enforced primarily against certain communities, communities of color, communities already struggling with limited access to education and housing and healthcare and employment and access to government services, right? And this film does a critical job, plays a critical role in connecting the criminalization of Black Americans through misdemeanor charges all the way back to Reconstruction era post-slavery. That's a history that we need to tell, we need to remember, we need to internalize. And those of us working in government or in advocacy around these issues need to remember that every single day it is not enough to say, well, I'm not racist. We must be proactively anti-racist. We have to remember that, you know, so much of the misdemeanor criminal enforcement is replicating racial disparities that exist in other areas of life. And so many misdemeanor crimes relate to poverty. As San Francisco's district attorney, I've committed, since before I was even in office, to decriminalize poverty. I'll just give you one example of how we've done that. One of my first policies after I took office in January of 2020 was to replace a wealth-based system of money bail with a risk-based system of pretrial detention only in those instances where there are no conditions short of detention that can reasonably protect the public. Throughout my career, I saw far too many people sitting in jail simply because of their poverty, right? And we all know that it's not a crime to be poor. And we also all know that there's a presumption of innocence, that not everyone arrested by the police is in fact guilty of a crime, and that not everyone who's in fact guilty of a crime should be sentenced to jail. And yet our system, the system I inherited, the system still in operation all across the state of California and all across this country, is one in which wealthy people can buy their way out of jail no matter how strong the evidence is, no matter how high the risk they pose to public safety. While poor people on the other side, arrested for trivial, petty offenses like the ones Lisa described, languish behind bars simply because of their poverty. Now, I've worked to ensure that we no longer incarcerate people because they're poor, but instead only when there is a risk that cannot be mitigated through other means. And I have worked to ensure that we are addressing the root causes of crime. In San Francisco, 75% of people taken to county jail are drug addicted, mentally ill, or both, right? Rather than automatically saddling people with criminal convictions, we need to start providing treatment, rehabilitation, supportive housing, and reentry. That is how we build safety. That is how we expand the safety that we have in this great city. That is how we continue to engage in a robust and deep conversation about the overreach of our criminal legal system. This film is helping to drive these conversations forward at a critical moment in American history as we think about policing and race and the criminal legal system and how we can put that word justice back into that phrase. I want to congratulate everyone at Brave New Films for this impactful work. And I look forward to seeing and hopefully being part of the change that it is helping to effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chesa. Appreciate everything that you're doing every single day in this fight. And I want to thank Dr. Weber, Tom Steyer, Lisa James. It does take a village, or as Tom says, it takes a mosaic for the change to happen. The film is finished, and that's when the work really just begins. It's available, as I was saying before, you name it, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, long versions, short versions, clips of it. And the goal is to reach as many people as we can to energize them and support the people who are out in the front lines, getting up every day and fighting this fight, and to create the legislation and create the social movement and to create the activism that's going to relate to and connect to and cause change. So thank all of you who are watching tonight. Thank all of you who are involved in this. And I look forward to seeing you on the front lines. Good night to all.